Well, hello, superstars. It is your pal, Danny, here with a quantum languaging offering. It's been a minute since I have led a webinar. I did put out a poll, and overwhelming consensus was that folks are really jazzed for my Language of Sovereign Authority webinar. This webinar and this technology that is informing it is what has rendered me, according to the Gold Pill podcast, the most dangerous woman on the internet. I am very clear that this quantum languaging technology, and specifically the Language of Sovereign Authority, is what has the big tech fucktards and the powers that were shaking in their boots when I put something out, and what does have me being so targeted, so shadow banned, so censored, because what I am offering with this technology is an antidote to all of their nonsense. The Language of Sovereign Authority is a technology that allows us to set our frequency permanently to that of sovereign agency, complete unrelenting empowerment, and unfuckwithable badassery. What it does is that it allows us to use our language and our thoughts to align our frequency with sovereign authority. So regardless of what is happening in the external world, regardless of what false flags are pulled next, of what illegal unconstitutional mandates they attempt to foist upon us, we get to remain sovereign because of our internal frequency, which is being consistently set and maintained and cultivated by way of our every word. So this is really a must attend webinar for everyone who is choosing to stand in our sovereign authority in the face of increasing attempts to chip away at our freedom, at our critical thinking, at our autonomy, and our God-given right to decide what is best for us, for our bodies, for our children, without the state attempting to impose their sniveling little snouts in our business. So it is a 3-hour webinar. I'm leading 2 sessions. The first one is Sunday, June 25th at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. The second one is Monday, June 26th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. Sign up for whichever one works best with your schedule. If neither work and you can't be there in real time, no worries. The webinar will be recorded, and everyone who registers will be sent the recording link after the fact, to which you will have lifetime access. Woohoo! I recommend signing up immediately. I recommend sending the link to all of your friends, because the more that the people in our community are hip to this technology, the more we can act as an additional set of ears, right, to help remind one another and offer reflections should we hear ourselves slipping back into languaging patterns that are not supporting our sovereign authority. It's really a more the merriest kind of scenario. Registration information is included in the comment section below. If you have any questions, you can find me through my website, dannycats.com. I'm so excited to share this phenomenal webinar with you. I can guarantee that no one else on the planet is offering anything even vaguely close to this, and this technology really truly works in terms of opening doors, in terms of rendering us impervious to attempts to clamp down on our liberty, our freedom of expression, movement, etc. It really is a game-changing tool. So I so look forward to seeing you at my webinar, and we're gonna have a lot of fun. Well, hello, superstars, and welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Danny Cats. Today, I am joined by Word Up podcast favorite, Robert Phoenix. This is a non-monogamous inquiry. I'm talking to different astrologers on the sham that is the cusp. And then in the meantime, this stuff has come up around RFK in Israel. And again, like, I would love to talk to you about it just so you can help me and us understand like the Kennedys' history with Israel and what may or may not really be going on with that.
Sure, to the best of my ability. If you want, we can even look at Israel's chart too, which I have on tap. We can check that out. So
yes, I would love that. I would love that. Cool.
I'm game. I'm all
awesome.
in.
Yeah. And is there anything else like super up that you're stoked to talk about that I haven't mentioned as of yet?
You know, I guess I could chime in on the woke parade, but it's just so prevalent and everywhere right now, where it's like there's so many other places or venues that you can talk about it with. We could talk about it a little bit in context with astrology, with Pluto and Aquarius.
Sure.
And we can you know, kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit. And yeah, I think that might be worth talking about since we're talking about astrology today.
Cool. I love that. And I also am welcoming any perspectives on Pluto and Aquarius that extend beyond me getting my ass kicked and handed it to me in such a tough way right now because it's just sitting on my sun, like mocking me.
Well, that's a real, you know, not everybody goes through a Pluto Sun conjunction in their lifetime. I did, but for me, Pluto conjuncted my sun 1969, 1970. And that period was really hard for me as a kid. I went through a very difficult time with moving and a new set of friends, but it wasn't just friends. It was like life conditions with my father or my mother. And it was a heavy time, really heavy time. And it initiated me into, in some ways, the underworld, right? Like my innocence was popped when Pluto was at those final degrees of Virgo just before it went into Libra. So it's just it's an interesting thing to happen, and depending on where you are in your life and what stage you're in, Pluto's going to have just a very different effect. For me, it was my childhood, and but there was also something really interesting that happened during that time as well with Pluto on my sun, and feeling like I was way older than other kids in a lot of ways, and even the thoughts that I was having, the books I was reading that were very different than other kids, which was, you know, again, this kind of transformation that Pluto will bring. And again, it just depends on where you are, you know, on your journey. And so you're in a very interesting place because, you know, you're at an age where you're to some degree, you're kind of peaking, right? In terms of your perspective and who you are as an identity. And you're wired into the times themselves. And 2 years ago, you had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction right on your sun, right, which is a precursor for Pluto. And Pluto is merciless, right? That's the nature of Pluto. It's absolutely merciless. And you don't make deals with Pluto. You know, like, just take a little bit, please. Just take a little bit. Leave something behind for what I know. Pluto doesn't play that way. Neptune and Uranus, there are different kind of arrangements with Neptune and Uranus. Like with Neptune, you can surrender, you can give it away, right? Maybe you can paint, you know, or whatever, right? Like, it's like, you know, okay, God, this is above my pay grade. You know, Calgon, take me away, right? You can do that with Neptune. Uranus, you can actually be creative with Uranus. You know, you can change things up because Uranus encourages you to have some kind of revolution or change in your life, right? Mm-hmm. Pluto, no, and there's no middle ground with Pluto. It is black or white, right? So you, Danny, as an identity, everything gets challenged. It all gets challenged. And in Aquarius, my God, I mean, you're getting, you know, like when Pluto is done with you, hopefully you'll still be one gender. But when Pluto is done with you, we'll be dealing with a bit of a different Danny Katz, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. And it's giving me, and like actually speaking about woke culture specifically, it's giving me this appreciation that like life isn't fair, suffering is, And any allegations about life needing to be kinder to us because of some mythology we carry in our head is bullshit. Like sometimes it's just sucky and uncomfortable, and that's fine, and nothing's wrong, and it's not a problem. That's just part of the path.
Well, it's really interesting because when you look at sort of the new age fairy tales that really started to pop up in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're all based on this idea of this egalitarian Aquarian world that we would all kind of inhabit and live in, and everybody would be living their best fairy tale. And I think Pluto and Aquarius, at least in the beginning, it shows instead of enlightenment, endarkenment. And we see how dark things are. We see how dark the potential for groupthink is. We see how dark the potential for systems of information and communication all being aligned under kind of one rubric and one umbrella, right? That's all very Pluto and Aquarius stuff. Very big brothery, right? Very, very big brothery. But I think that ultimately we'll find something through this period. But initially, in those early degrees of a sign, man, it's really powerful. It's like the gates are open, right? And that's what we've seen. I mean, there's no mistake that once Pluto went into Aquarius, the LGBTQAI plus thing just went off the charts, right? Just completely off the charts. And I was telling people about this Pluto and Aquarius moment that we're just briefly experiencing now. And it's like sticking your head inside of a portal to another world, kind of like a Rick and Morty episode, right? Like we're living in Rick and Morty world now. And but when Pluto goes retrograde, it will kind of revert back a little bit. And it'd be like, oh, well, gee, remember that? Oh man, that was fucking crazy, right? It's like all of a sudden the drip line is off and we're on to something else. But it comes back again next year. But we're getting this kind of preview of what this world can be like in the dark side or the dark expression of Aquarius. And other than the people that are, trying desperately to be recognized and held up as a functioning member of society, everybody else is really not having it and trying to figure out, well, what do we do with this, right? How do we combat what's going on here? And this is a really interesting question, and people don't really understand the dynamics of like what's taking place. So we'll take Bud Light, for instance, right? And the whole Dylan Mulvaney thing, which again happens pretty much right after Pluto goes into Aquarius. And of course, the so-called right's knee-jerk reaction is to boycott Bud Light, to show Bud Light a real lesson, right? We're going to show them. There's ramifications for that. And I've talked about that on my show a couple of times, where there are people outside of the corporate structure of Budweiser that pay a penalty for this. These are the people that drive trucks or distributors, right? If their product isn't sold, it's not moving, those people don't have jobs, right? So, this is a really insidious way to get the people, Americans, to destroy their own businesses and institutions and to bring us one step closer to whatever they want to roll out as a result of this. And so Americans have really no recourse except for boycotting or making a big deal out of something. But what they're really doing is that they're participating in their own demise. But it's a hard one, right? Because what do? Well, you keep buying Bud Light. And so you validate their marketing campaign, their advertising campaign. And Alyssa Schneider Hayden, or whatever her name is, that she's such a great hire, right? You do that, or you boycott, and then the company hits this, and all these local distributors have to lay people off, and you've got more people on the dole, right? So it's a really hard place because people are trying to voice their displeasure. The better alternative would be to have a parallel system set up and have, people ready to go to come to work for your brewery or your distributor. But, we're not there, not at that level. We don't have the parallel system set up. Even something like Chick-fil-A, Chick-fil-A, which, by the way, people were shocked that Chick-fil-A was, kind of going woke. I'm like, that's, if you paid any attention to really what Chick-fil-A is about, they have been a part of this game for a while. And I did a show back in 2020 where I looked at, the Aspen Institute
Yes.
right. So I went through and I looked at the roster of, this is a while ago, the last Aspen Ideas Festival that they had prior to COVID. I looked at who attended, and the attendees list is quite interesting.
Are they all like WEF, like scumbags?
Well, there are, there's a lot of grooming that goes on at Aspen. One of the people that was a participant was Alicia Garza for Black Lives Matter, but she wasn't listed as Black Lives Matter. She had some other nonprofit that she was fronting. And what they also had were a number of people from, of all places, Minnesota, right? Like St. Paul, Minneapolis, all these kinds of small towns. Like, why are all, and it was a special group, like it was a special group that they had brought there for the Aspen Ideas Institute. Well, what happens in 2020? You've got George Floyd in Minneapolis, right?
What a coincidence,
right? So then they have these scholarship funds, like foundational scholarship funds. One is the Bush family. So the Bush family is always bringing people to the Aspen Institute of Ideas. And Chick-fil-A is another, right? Chick-fil-A is, they're sending their people to the Aspen Institute. Why? Because they want them groomed.
Right.
They want them groomed for global business. So Chick-fil-A now is doing the same thing. And people are, oh my God, can you believe it? Of course you can fucking believe it. Every single Major League Baseball team, except one, is indulging in Pride Month, and including
and it's a whole month, like a whole month.
This is all
get one day, but the gay thing, it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. So what do we do, right?
Well, that's my question, because you personally don't support boycotts and rescinding our financial.
Well, here's the deal. First of all, I would never fucking drink Bud Light to begin with. Okay. Right. So I don't have to boycott Bud Light. It's not a part of my palate. I don't go to Chick-fil-A.
Right.
As much as everybody loves their chicken sandwich, I don't try not to eat wheat.
Right.
And the last thing I checked was their sandwich had wheat in it.
Right.
So, but I would say if you're going to do that, do it because you want to have something more healthy in your body, right? Or if you're going to, divest yourself of a beer, do it because you want to drink a better beer, and I think those things actually matter, by the way. I think they matter. I think the intentionality matters. But if you want to make a statement, by all means, but they're going to be covered, they're totally going to be covered. BlackRock will cover their ass.
Of course, BlackRock's the one who's forcing this. It just feels like, part of what I've been going through in this Pluto and Aquarius is realizing this game is so rigged.
Totally rigged.
Everything I thought I would accomplish in my adult life is off the table, because that's not how the world works. So it has me in this big pause of like, this feels actually impenetrable. And I've been taking solace in like the tiny moments of voting with my dollars. And like here in New Mexico, they're like, like Meow Wolf is this big thing.
I know Meow Wolf, yeah.
Yeah, so Meow Wolf was requiring proof of vaccines a couple years ago. And there was a big concert there a few months ago that I wanted to go to. And my friend who was promoting it, asked me if I was coming. And I said, I'm not giving them my money. And he's like, well, they don't have that policy anymore. And I'm like, I don't reward apartheid even after the fact. And I'm the crazy one for having this perspective, but I also feel like that's out of integrity for me to be giving my money to these businesses. And everyone just seems to have forgotten. It's so convenient that we all forgot what they did a year ago because we want to go to their stuff. So there's no recourse. So nothing's ever going to change.
Right. And I think when you get into Pluto, the intensity of Pluto is that you realize, you have to make sacrifice. That's the thing with Pluto. Like you're all in or you're all out.
Right.
Right. And so I'm the same way. I'm just, there are certain things I'll never patronize or go back to. Like there's a restaurant not far from here in Johnson City. And I was there for my 60th birthday, and I was treated really shabbily because I didn't have a mask on.
On your birthday.
Yeah, my birthday. And even though my girlfriend walked in without a mask, was seated without a mask, was sitting there without a mask, I had this waiter who clearly sized me up as like a boomer dude or whatever. It started laying a mask trip on me, and I got really fucking pissed at him. And I walked out. Took my girlfriend, and he just treated her shabbily. And I'll never go back to that restaurant. And it's a good restaurant. And I actually talked with the owner the next day, and he was apologizing, tripping all over himself. I don't care. I'll never go back.
Right. So, I mean, it feels like it's the last vestige of people power is where we put our dollars. And this is something that I've noticed. Emily and I've talked about this. We're seeing an uptick in the weaponization of customer service, but I see that tied in with the woke thing where, like, if you use the waiters, like if you misgender the waiter, then all of a sudden there's this like clown world flip where they can treat the customer like shit.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think you probably get more of that in more typically urban areas. I don't see that much out of it out here, but this guy at this restaurant was one of those dudes. He was one of those dudes, and I fit his profile, and he was going to make me pay in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah.
It's
So
like this vigilante woke thing. I experience it mostly like Apple Care or AT&T or something, and they're like they're so thin-skinned now. So it's like, like I got a little stressed when I was on the phone with like Wix customer care, and he's like, I'm gonna need you to relax. And I'm like, I'm sorry, are you telling me what state I need to embody
wow,
for you to help me? And he hung up on me. He like literally hung up on me.
wow.
And that is happening more and more and more. And I'm wondering if that's part of, like, is that tied in with Pluto and Aquarius with this woke ridiculousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because anytime you get into kind of an anonymous situation, people tend to lose their civility, right? Whether it's online in Twitter or a customer service person who can't look you in the eye and say, hey, what's wrong? Can we fix this? Or right. I feel like there's that. And then there's also something more existential, which is that customer service person's job is, it's whistling by the graveyard right now, right? Because they have customer service tools lined up, set up, ready to go, where it's all automated. You and I would have a conversation. You wouldn't know that you would be having a conversation with an AI. The AI could translate the conversation into any language. They've shown that the AI can provide 25 to 30 layers of complexity with any kind of given phone call, right? So that's all waiting to go. Right?
I feel like it's already here. I feel like
it's here, but it's not deployed universally.
really?
Right? No, it's not.
Because I wonder often how many humans on this planet are legit humans.
That's a different question, but yeah, I agree with you.
So when I'm talking to these customer service people who they all seem to be following the same script of getting so offended at things, I feel like this is how they're programming the AI now. And I had a customer service guy. Well, I honestly don't know if it was a man or a woman. It was some non-binary thing. And at one point, the being or the AI or whatever it was said, well, you could just create a little password or something. And I'm like, a little password or something? Is this how swishy our customer service has gotten? Like, it's so unprofessional.
Well, you're also playing roulette, because sometimes you get somebody from another country.
Most of the time.
Yeah, right. Or so, I'd have to say that by and large, I'm pretty okay for the most part with customer service. I try not to lean on them too much, although I've just moved my mother, and it wasn't the customer service, but the actual service that I was having a hard time with. The customer service people they're kind of grunts, and they can't do very much, right?
Right.
But their jobs are all in jeopardy at some point. But when customer service is like one of those last kind of bastions of like the service oriented economy. Like if you really needed a job, you can get a customer service job. and you could work for an airline or a product or whatever. And most of the times you could work out of home. That's getting close to going away, right? So we just keep whittling down, the manufacturing and the automation, and even now in the service industry. So I think we're also living with this, I guess, for lack of a better term, existential dread that this world is over, right? That it's over. And where do we go from here? And I feel like, not to say that, so we're going to talk about cusps, right? Yeah. And there is a sense at times that we are on the cusp of a change, right? We are on the cusp, which is different than cusp with signs. Mm-hmm. And we move back and forth. We can use Pluto as an example, because Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2009. Mm-hmm. And we've gone through 2 passes of the Pluto return with the US. We're going to have one more starting in August. It's the last gas for Pluto in Capricorn. Basically, I mean, we'll have one more election with Pluto in Capricorn in November of next year. And then after that, it's Pluto and Aquarius from here on out. So my sense is that we're probably going to have the last presidential election in 2024. I think it's the last one. After Pluto and Aquarius happens, we get to 2028. We're 2 years away from Agenda 2030. Like, what's going to happen in those 4 years?
Do you have, I mean, in terms of, I feel like we already lost the presidential elections. Like, after what happened in 2020, like, we're still going to play.
We'll still play the script. It'll happen, but it'll be the last one.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because one of 2 things is going to happen. Number one, we'll either have some kind of global order, in which case you won't need an American president, right? Be rendered,
we're one world government,
right? Or we'll head into some kind of balkanization with this country. And
what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, it would be like Texas would be its own thing. Maybe it would team up with Oklahoma, balkanization, right? And that balkanization could be statewide, but it could also be zones. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Hunger Games, right? So you have Snow, who's the president of Pan Am, but there are other presidents too, right? So if you also look at, Gordon Michael Scallion, do you remember that guy at all?
No.
So Gordon Michael Scallion was kind of an interesting character. He was around during the 90s, and he was one of these guys who was a scientist, and he had this experience where he was like locked up for 3 days with his body completely, like almost like a coma, right? But then he comes out of it. But during those 3 days, he sees all these things, and he comes back with some very interesting abilities. And one of the things that he talked about back then was this map of the United States, which looks a lot like how Casey saw the United States at a certain point, that the United States looked very different, that the Mississippi River is almost like a small inlet sea. And he talked about the political structure of the United States moving forward. And there were, I think, 4 or 5 presidents, and that they all represented different regions. And I also think that comes up in John Teeter, and whether or not John Teeter was a LARP or real, he talks about the same thing, that there's more than one president, right? So with Pluto and Aquarius, I could see that if we're in that model, if we're in something where it's no longer this massive superstructure, that we have these regions, and the regions are connected, but they're not all under one umbrella. And so there's a representative from each of those regions, which I think is quite possible. And maybe it would be the most healthy thing. But that's going to be Pluto and Aquarius territory. Things are going to be different. So we're kind of at the last gasp here with Pluto and Capricorn, but we're sticking our head, through the portal, and we're seeing how crazy fucking weird this thing could be. Right?
Yeah. Super weird, super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it feels like this tight squeeze. All right, so moving into cusps, because, with Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius, I am a 0 degrees Aquarius. And my whole life, I've been told I'm on the cusp. And that has never gelled with me. I'm like, Capricorn has nothing to do with me. I don't resonate with that sign. I don't understand why we're being lumped in when 29 degrees of one sign feels very different from 0 degrees of the next. So, can you enlighten us
Sure,
on the
sure,
cusp sham?
sure. I mean, from my experience as a 29-degree sun sign and an astrologer, uh, the idea of a cusp sounds nice, but you're either one sign or the other, right? And you may have some traits of the next sign. Like I have 3 planets in Libra,
Mm-hmm.
so I may have some Libra traits. But I'm a 29-degree Virgo sun, which is the final degree. It's the anaretic degree. There's no energy left at 29 degrees. It's zero. Not zero like you, but it's flat. There's nothing left, which brings with it its own kind of consequences and story. But you're at 0 Aquarius. And so this is how, in my estimation, signs work. Okay. When you get to the final degrees of a sign, so we'll go 27, 28. Those two are kind of interesting because the sign is, I like to think of the sign at that point as a star that's in a supernova,
Okay.
right? Like if you, I know you like, I like to use this example. So Bill Murray is born at 28 degrees Virgo. Okay. If you watch Bill Murray, he's like out of control, right? He's like this kind of supernova. You never know what he's going to do. He's acting out at Pebble Beach, right? When we get to the 27th and particularly the 28th degree, it's like blah, it's just blah. And then you go to 29 and it goes dark, right? So you get the supernova effect at 29, 28 degrees, 29, it goes dark. And literally you have like a black hole at the 29th degree. And then when you get to the next degree, which is 0, you have a newborn sign, right? It's like a new star is born out of the void of the 29th degree, which is the black hole. So the 0 degree is more potent than any other degree in terms of astrology. You're more Aquarian than any other Aquarian you're ever going to meet. That has nothing to do with Capricorn at all. Nothing whatsoever, right? So this idea of the cusp with signs, it's kind of a quaint notion, but there's in my estimation, there's nothing to it. You're one sign or the other.
So I'm curious to know like where you think the myth of cusp came in, but I'm also curious to know how you experience 29 degrees Virgo. Like how does that express through you since you're living that degree?
So I think cusps for houses in astrology are interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you have a planet that's within 5 degrees of the next house,
Mm-hmm.
as an astrologer, I begin to read for that house.
Okay.
And the closer the degree, the more influence. So I think cusps of houses
Mm-hmm.
are very important,
Mm-hmm.
right? Very, very important. And you can have a little real estate at like maybe 5 or 6 degrees, but really at 5 degrees, I'm starting to look at what's going on in the next house.
Okay.
So maybe it's because there's a transposition of house and sign.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we could have a dialogue about the house, but not about the sign.
Right.
That's not happening. As far as my 29-degree sun, so it's weird. It's kind of a weird degree for a number of reasons because I was born on an eclipse too.
Okay.
So I have an anaretic sun, and I was born just like a day and a half after an eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
So that plays into my my expression or experience. And also you'll find a lot of anaretic people are born around the 22nd of a month.
Okay.
And so when you have the number 22, there tends to be a higher expectation of like what an individual can achieve with a 22 vibration. And I felt an immense amount of pressure in my life to do something with my life, like bigger than, and there's nothing wrong with having, a reasonable job or profession where you're adding value to people's lives. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, our world turns on that. But I always felt like I needed to do something bigger or more than that. It was just something internal that I felt. So there's the pressure of that with the 22nd and the, what we call the master number, and then the sign where there's nothing left. So it's hard, it's kind of difficult because, I mean, I'm a Virgo, but I've often been scolded for not being Virgo enough, especially with my living environment. So it's a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky because I feel like I'm kind of wrapping these lessons up, which is really what the 29th degree is about. Like, okay, yeah, I got to learn all this Virgo shit. I would just love to hang out and eat great food and have great conversation and go to parties and, have fun with all my Libra planets, but, I can't do that. So, I'm hanging out on this 29 degree for a reason. And the other thing that I've experienced in my life, and I came to find this out a little bit later, is that people that are born with the 29th degree will often go down a certain path and then they'll pull out for whatever reason. And I've had that on more than one occasion where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this. Right. And so that part is connected to the whole anaretic experience, and it will confuse people. And I can't tell you why, right? I can't tell you why, but it's associated with being born with an anaretic degree.
So, and what is the definition of an anaretic degree?
It's a 29th degree of the sign. Okay. There's nothing left. Like, again, 0 degrees. So in astrology, signs are broken up into decans. So you have the first decan, the second decan, and the third decan. And the first decan, just for the sake of the ease of math, would be 0 to 10, right? So you were born in the Aquarian decan. If you were born at, let's say, again, for the sake of argument, 11 degrees Aquarius, you would be born in the decan following the Aquarian decan. And in this case, it would be the Gemini decan. So those degrees basically from 10 to 20, I think the decans are about 9.45 or something like that. But those degrees of Aquarius would be different than the first degrees. Number one, first 10 degrees, you're fully immersed in the sign, right? And the further you get away from the sign, the further you get away from the influence of the sign. So you would take on some of the characteristics of the next air sign over. So for Aquarius, that would be Gemini. And then the third decan, Aquarius, would be the Libra decan. So each of those decans, Aquarius has a different expression in a lot of ways. But you're like the uncut version. You're like the Peruvian flake of Aquarius.
So it sounds like the 29th degree, like you said, is this nether region. Like 28 is embodying, like, let's say if we're talking about Virgo, all of the Virgo, but then there's this like void of course before it bounces into Libra.
Exactly. Yes.
So it makes even less sense to try to combine these
absolutely
cusps.
Absolutely, because there's nothing left there, right? There's nothing left. And I'm clearly not a Libra, right? So yeah, it's kind of this no man's land, this interzone between the signs. So there's no cusp. The houses, absolutely, there's cusps of houses for sure. But signs.
Is there some sort of like elderhood at 29th degree, or some sort of like acknowledgement of having every degree leading up to you? Or does that not apply because it's kind of a void of course?
I don't know. It's really weird. And I don't think it lines up for everybody in the same way. Right. But in do you know Arguelles' system, the dream spell? Do you know? Okay. So in the dream spell, I'm 13 Caban.
Okay.
Which is the last degree of Caban.
Right.
Right. So I'm the last degree of Virgo.
Right.
and I'm the last degree of Caban. And I think for me, when I look at that, and for 13 Caban is I endure in order to evolve. And I feel like at a 29 degree, as a 29 degree Virgo, I've had to endure a lot. And so as a result of that, there's an evolutionary process that occurs. And again, won't happen with every person. But for me, those two systems, they clearly line up because I'm at the end of Caban. I'm at the end of Virgo.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, maybe the answer to your question, what's that?
Do you experience more endings than people who don't have 29-degree suns?
I would say earlier in my life, yes, because I'm born in the 9th month, right?
Right.
So that 9 vibration in the first 30 years is all about letting go.
Yep.
And like cue up the Smiths, how soon is now, or please let me get what I want this time, right? That's what I felt a lot like in my 20s. It was just like, when am I gonna get it, right? When am I gonna get it? When am I gonna get the girl, the job, or the whatever?
Yep.
And just when I thought I would have something, it would go away.
Right.
And it was like I had to learn how to let go. And on the relationship side, I learned how to let go, but I kind of went in the other direction. It's like, I'll just indulge in serial monogamy here, and I'll let go before you will, right? So I kind of trained myself to go in a bit of a different direction. But yeah, I mean, that was hard. I mean, that was challenging. And then I went to the second decan, and everybody who has numerology, we all have numerology in our charts in our lives. So the first number that you're born with. So for you, what is it? One, you're one, and you're born on what, the 21st or 22nd? 21st. Yeah. So your first stage, right? So we'll go back to decans in terms of numerology. We'll just say your first numerological decan would be based on that one vibration, which is all about self-starting, right? Being an individual, a bit of the magician, the application of will. You're kind of testing yourself against the world. Who am I? How does this work? What am I going to do? Or not even what am I going to do? I'm just going to do it, and then I'll figure it out, right? That's like for your first 30 years. And then you move into the second phase of your numerological experience, which is the 3. And you'll be in the 3 until about 58. And 3s are about being eclectic and try this on and try that on and try this on and try that on. And 3s generally like to have fun, right? Like, boredom is the worst thing for a 3, but also, floating around from one lily pad to the other can be fun, but you also may lose out on some depth and, hanging out with something for a longer period of time. So, and then what are you? Are you a dragon or something like that? What's your
I'm a wood pig.
You're a wood pig. Okay. So what year is that for you?
Well, it's supposed to be 71, but because I'm January
Right.
72,
But
it got like lumped in with 71.
So 71. You're born in 71.
72.
72. Because
But
so for numerology, that matters, right?
Okay.
That matters. So 72, so it'd be 9. So you would come back to the 1 again. So you come back around to the 1. So it would be, so from a numerological standpoint, you would start off for the first 30 years figuring out who you are and figuring out how you bounce up against this environment, but always with this idea of the self, right? And being kind of self-motivated, self-starting, and wanting to work for yourself, all those things. Now you're in this phase where with the 3 is a bit more communal. It's like, who's in your sandbox with you? Like, who can you do things with? Who can you collaborate with? And then 58, you come back into the 1, and you'll come back into the 1 from a different place, right? Maybe more, I wouldn't say more integrated, but I'll just say more integrated anyway. Yeah, we'll say more integrated, but that's where you would come back, right? So 131, like that would be your cycle.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and it fits too, right? Because as a 0 degree Aquarian, you're at the very first part of the sign. You're more Aquarian than anybody else. So why wouldn't you like launch yourself kind of into the world in some ways, and you know, rebellious, defiant, whatever, right? That's now for Aquarians that are born in the second month, which would be February Aquarians, or they're different, right? Because that's the 2 cycle.
Right.
And they're learning about relationships and friendships and some very Aquarian stuff. But what's interesting, because of Aquarius, and you start off with that 2 cycle, there is also kind of a letting go, because Aquarians are not really binary in some ways. And 2 is a binary number. And Aquarians are kind of beyond binary. Aquarians constellate with in a different, to me, Aquarius is more like a 6, and it's more communal. And so Aquarians have to learn kind of about those lessons with the 2, right? So it's kind of an interesting lesson. And so yeah, they're friends. I mean, that's the sign of Aquarius. It's all about agape and fellowship and community and friendship. And so when you get into that 2 cycle, or that 2 phase, you realize that it's not just you and the other. There are other people that you have to deal with, you know, in terms of relationship. So anyway, this is your time, right? I mean, the next 20 years for you, even with Pluto on your sun, should be really intense and powerful. And Pluto, it's at a certain point, you'll realize that Pluto on your sun is a gift. Like, you will realize it, but like, wow, man, I just had all this shit just burned away. Right. And what you're left with is, like, you know, it's pure, it's the essence, you know. So you're in the alchemizer, you're in the vulcanizer, you're in the chamber, and you're getting melted down, but it's okay, right? It's okay. And again, you look back on December 21st, 2020, and that's when Jupiter and Saturn was right on your sun. And that precludes a 20-year period of, I think, really major work for you, right? Because you're getting the structure and the order of Saturn, and then the opening and the possibility and potential with Jupiter working with you. So you're going through an initiatory phase, and it'll lighten up a little bit when Pluto goes retrograde, when it comes back again in December of next year. But the good news with that is that, you know, it's kind of often crawling at that point. Right. And so you get to 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees. Even when you get to like 4 or 5 degrees and Pluto gets some separation from your sun, you'll feel different. You'll feel like you've come through something, and whatever is not yours, you let it go. Right. And whatever's yours you have afterwards is yours. So, but it can be very intense, and especially like going through it now in this fucking world, you know, I mean, 10 years ago would have been very different for you at Pluto.
Yeah.
But now it seems like your journey and your experience is tied into the world, you know, and tied into this reality. So you're going to feel it really intensely, really, really intensely. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I look forward to it getting some distance from me. Where do you think this myth of the cusp came from, and what function is it serving to have us buy into it?
You know, I'll be honest with you, I have no idea where it came from. I think there's probably some astrologer somewhere that threw the idea out there, and I think it's, for some people, it's easier for them to say that I'm on the cusp versus like figuring out what sign they're born under. It's just easier. Oh, I'm on the cusp. Right. And there are some people, honestly, I mean, if I wanted to make a case, I could say, well, I feel really Libran, but it's not because I'm born on the cusp. I've got 3 fucking planets in Libra, and they're all conjunct. Right. And so when people,
which planets do you have in Libra?
Mercury, Venus, and the moon. Actually, I have Moon, Mercury conjunct, and they're like separated by 1 degree, a little too close, actually.
Wow.
And then I have Venus like a little further out, but they're all conjunct together in Libra.
That's a
So
lot.
it is a lot, and it's helpful. I mean, for me, it's helpful.
Yeah.
In the work that I do. I can work with people.
Yeah.
With all the Libra.
Yeah, I would imagine with Mercury and Venus, like very diplomatic in how you communicate, diplomatic in how you're relating with other people.
Yeah, I mean, the Moon Mercury conjunction was really hard as a kid, because, man, it's separated by 1 degree, and I was just I was so sensitive when I was a kid, and the moon is just in front of Mercury in my chart, so it's like emotions first and head after that. It took me a while to kind of work through a lot of that intense sensitivity around it. But at the end of the day, it's become, a pretty good ally because I'm pretty intuitive and have a good memory. And Moon Mercury conjunctions, I think by and large, are pretty interesting in astrology. But it took me a long time to kind of get through it, because I was the kid that, cried at school, right? It was like, ugh,
That's tough for boys.
it is tough for boys. I didn't do it often, but every now and then it would happen. And it would usually happen in like the worst fucking moment, right?
Right.
So, yeah, but it became more of a gift than a burden. But that's astrology, you after a while you understand your chart, you work through your chart and have to go through things, and then ultimately you can't have the gift of something. It's these aspects, and I've had some very difficult people or charts to work with. Some are more difficult than others, but they're not death sentences, right? They're
Right.
not death sentences.
Right.
And
It's just like, how do we choose to work with the blueprint? Like, here's what you got.
right.
How can you take best advantage of everything you're dealing with?
And some shit is harder than others. Like I've seen some really difficult charts. And at the end of the day, I feel like if you understand your chart and can work within the bounds of your chart and or the opportunity, there's things you can get done. Right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a little sidestep. I know this wasn't initially on the docket, but I had sent you the short video of RFK rolling back his support for Roger Waters, which has now continued to escalate into this big kind of Israel, I guess, allegiance. And I'm curious to know, A, your take on it, and B, what I did hear RFK say is like, well, my family has always had a tight relationship with Israel. And so I started digging around this morning, like, is that true? What was that about? Like, can you catch us up to speed?
He's lying through his teeth. So, well, let me say this. The answer to that, to his, the answer to his statement is yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. So in order for John F. Kennedy to get elected, old man Kennedy made deals.
Okay.
Old man Kennedy knew all the scumbags, right? He basically so old man Kennedy knew the people that were bringing liquor into the country because they had speakeasies. Now, if you go on the internet, you'll say, well, there's no proof of it ever. Bullshit, right? The Kennedys were in with people like the Bronfman family. Okay. The Bronfmans were bringing Canadian whiskey from Canada into the United States, and the Kennedys were all over it, right? Old man Kennedy also was in the theater business, and he had movie theaters. He actually lived in LA for a while. He had an affair with some actress. I forget, it was like Greta Garbo or some actress that the old man Kennedy had an affair with. But he was in the movie theater business, and through the movie theaters, he met, of course, Jewish Hollywood, right? So they had connections in that world. The Bronfmans clearly are Jewish. And so they were profiting, the Kennedys were profiting off of these connections in a very fundamental fashion, right? Not only that, but old man Kennedy was buddies with Rockefeller and all the kind of the robber baron types, and he got all of his stocks out at the same time that they got their stocks out prior to the Depression. So the Kennedys are connected in a very big way. So fast forward, and JFK is running for president. So the old man sits down with the mob, the Italian mob, and he sits down with the Jewish mob, who are kind of one and the same, but they have their own operations, right? And he sits down with both of them. He says, look, I got to get my kid elected, and I need your help. Well, they say, okay, we'll help you. And on the Jewish mob side, you had like Meyer Lansky, you know, Bugsy Siegel, those people. On the Italian side, you had, of course, the Gambino family, and you know, so he's making deals with these families because he wants his son to get elected. And one of the things that was the stipulation from the Jewish side was that he would leave Israel alone. Now, remember, Israel had become a nation state in 1948. And they were, once Harry Truman became president, he basically gave them the golden key, right? He's like, yeah, because that's who got him elected. Harry Truman was a haberdasher, right, from the Midwest, and he was a Mason, and he was also whatchamacallit, the guys with the fez. You know what I'm talking about. He's one of those guys.
Okay.
So Shriner, he's a Shriner. So he was a Mason and a Shriner. He's very proud. So once he gets elected, it's like, here you go, Louis Brandeis, you're the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, right? And he's recognizing Israel as a nation state. He's turning over the keys to the United Nations. I mean, Harry Truman's a big fucking sellout, right? And he actually probably lost that election. And remember, you know, Dewey wins. He's holding up the newspaper. Well, not so fast, right? So then Ike comes in, and Ike kind of puts everything on chill. Like he's like, just, you know, and there's this weird kind of detente with the newly minted nation state of Israel. So then Kennedy comes in, and there are people who believe that Nixon actually won that election. And so, but that's not how it turned out. So he gets elected. And he and Bobby immediately turn on the mob. Not only that, but they also turn on Israel. And David Ben-Gurion fucking hated JFK. And the reason why he hated JFK is because JFK did not want Israel to build their nuclear power plant. I believe it's in Ashkelon, if I'm not mistaken. And he did not want them to do that. So JFK was anti-atomic Israel. And so they had a relationship, a lot of antipathy between Israel and JFK. And then you had the mob side, and they were fucking pissed. It was like, well, what the hell? You know, a couple of years ago, you were hanging out in Vegas with Sam Giancana and Bobby and Marilyn Monroe and passing her back and forth. And now all of a sudden you're coming after us, right? So both of those guys pissed off the people that got them elected. Now, I don't know why they did that. Maybe because it was their way of running the game and turning the game. Right? Maybe they thought that they had the juice, right? But when you look at the people who were involved in the assassination of JFK, you had, you know, Jacob Rubenstein, right, who was running a club in Dallas. And there have been many people who had connected Jack Ruby with the Mossad. And so you have all these characters involved in the Kennedy assassination, which start to look very weird at a certain point. Even Johnson. And there are some people who think that Johnson was actually Jewish. When you look at Johnson, he looks Jewish. And so it's like he might have had his own, like when Johnson here in the state of Texas, like he just opened up the floodgates for Russian Jews to come into like Corpus Christi and Galveston, huge amount of people, right? So there was
do you believe, because I've heard, you know, and like I've heard Mossad killed Kennedy, I've heard CIA